Why do poor men fear debt while rich men use it? Not because rich men are braver, because they understand something poor men were never taught. Debt is not judged by its size. Debt is judged by what it controls. One man borrows to buy attention, another borrows to buy an asset. One man's debt makes him look successful. The other man's debt makes him harder to compete with. That is the hidden difference. The poor man asks, "Can I afford the payment?" The strategic man asks, "Will this debt create more power than it costs?" You can see this law in 3 places. Blackstone used debt to control Hilton and later produced billions in profit. Warren Buffett avoided reckless borrowing, but Berkshire Hathaway used insurance float as a form of low-cost leverage to own more assets than equity alone would allow. Tribune carried massive debt into bad timing and bankruptcy. Same weapon, different structure, different result. So this is not about loving debt, and it is not about fearing debt. It is about learning the difference between debt that buys ownership and debt that turns a man into property. Most men were trained to see debt emotionally. Their parents feared it, their friends feared it, their environment treated it like a disease, so they grew up believing that owing money is shameful. And for most men, it is. Not because debt itself is evil, but because most men do not use debt to build power. They use it to hide humiliation. They finance cars before they own assets. They buy clothes before they own cash flow. They use credit cards to imitate a life they have not earned. They borrow because they cannot tolerate how ordinary their life looks. That is not financial leverage. That is insecurity with an interest rate. The wealthy do something different. They do not ask whether debt makes them feel rich. They ask whether debt gives them control over something that can produce more value than the debt costs. That one question separates the man who becomes owned from the man who becomes harder to compete with. And before you understand that difference, you will either fear every form of debt like a slave or use debt recklessly like a fool. Both positions are weak. The deeper question is not, should I use debt? The deeper question is, have I earned the right to control debt before it controls me? Because leverage does not make weak men powerful, it makes their weakness more expensive. If you misunderstand financial leverage, you lose more than money. You lose optionality. You lose the power to say no. You lose the ability to leave a job that disrespects you. You lose the ability to take calculated risk. You lose the silence required to build. Every bad payment becomes a master. Every unnecessary obligation becomes a leash. Every debt used for image makes you more obedient to the very system you claim you want to escape. A man who owes too much cannot move like a free man. He cannot reject bad offers. He cannot wait for better timing. He cannot walk away from low-status rooms. He cannot negotiate from strength. He may look independent from the outside, but inside, his calendar belongs to creditors. His choices belong to payments. His courage belongs to income. He cannot afford to lose. This is why debt is not just financial. Debt is psychological. It changes how much disrespect you tolerate. It changes how much risk you can take. It changes how much truth you can speak. If you are an unsupported man with no safety net, you cannot afford to be stupid with leverage. You do not have rich parents behind you. You do not have inherited assets protecting you. You do not have a powerful network cleaning up your mistakes. You pay full price for every poor decision. This is why decorative debt is more dangerous for you than it is for a man born with protection. When he makes a mistake, someone may refinance him, introduce him, advise him, forgive him, or rescue him. When you make a mistake, the bill lands directly on your future. So stop copying the visible behavior of wealthy people before you understand the invisible structure beneath them. You see the debt. You do not see the assets. You see the purchase. You do not see the cash flow. You see the confidence. You do not see the collateral. You see the expansion. You do not see the proof. That is how poor men get seduced. They copy the action without the foundation. They borrow like owners while thinking like consumers. And debt punishes that confusion without mercy. Look at Blackstone and Hilton. In 2007, Blackstone bought Hilton in one of the most famous leverage deals in history. The transaction used approximately $20.6 billion of mortgage and mezzanine debt, plus about $5.7 billion of equity. Then the financial crisis came. Hotels are not perfectly stable assets. Travel can collapse. Credit markets can freeze. Lenders can become brutal. Timing can turn against you. That deal could have become a monument to arrogance. But Blackstone did not simply borrow against a fantasy. It took control of a real global hospitality system. Hilton had brand power, operating history, physical assets, and a business that could be restructured, improved, held, refinanced, and eventually taken public again. Years later, Blackstone's final exit from Hilton generated about 3.1 times investors' capital and roughly $14 billion of profit. That is not because debt was magic. It is because leverage was attached to an asset with recoverable power. Pressure came. They endured. The asset survived. The structure had enough strategic depth to make time work for them. Now look at Warren Buffett. Buffett is not famous for reckless borrowing. Berkshire Hathaway has said it uses debt sparingly and prefers long-term fixed-rate loans when it does borrow. Buffett even wrote that Berkshire would reject attractive opportunities rather than over-leverage the balance sheet. That is the part weak men miss. The rich do not fear debt. But the truly strategic do not worship it either. Berkshire used something even more powerful than ordinary debt: insurance float. That is money held by the insurance business because premiums are received before claims are paid. Buffett described float and deferred taxes as low-cost leverage that allowed Berkshire to own more assets than equity alone would permit, without many of the usual drawbacks of debt. This is the cleanest lesson. The powerful man does not ask, "How much can I borrow?" He asks, "What kind of obligation gives me maximum control with minimum fragility?" Now compare that to Tribune. Sam Zell was a billionaire real estate operator, but when Tribune went private through a leveraged buyout, the company carried massive debt. Bankruptcy court records later showed about $12.7 billion of principal debt outstanding at the petition date. The lesson is not that Zell was stupid. The lesson is colder. Even a billionaire can be punished when leverage is attached to a weakening business, bad timing, and a structure that cannot endure pressure. Debt does not care about your reputation. Debt does not care about your confidence. Debt does not care that you won before. The lender eats first, always. And this is where Machiavelli enters. Machiavelli wrote that it is much safer to be feared than loved when one must choose. In finance, this becomes a brutal law. It is safer to build a balance sheet that others must respect than to build an image that others might admire. Love is applause. Fear is structure. People may love your ambition, your dream, your vision, your story. But lenders respect only payments. Markets respect only proof. Partners respect only value. The world respects leverage only when it is backed by reality. Here is the cold truth. Debt is judged by what it controls, not by how big it is, not by whether people approve of it, not by whether it makes you feel successful. Debt that controls a productive asset can become leverage. Debt that controls nothing becomes captivity. A mortgage on a cash-flowing property is not the same as a car loan on a depreciating status symbol. A business loan used to buy equipment that increases production is not the same as a credit card balance used to impress people who will forget you tomorrow. A line of credit used against proven demand is not the same as borrowing to start a fantasy with no customers, no proof, no distribution, and no discipline. The poor man sees debt as a payment. The strategic man sees debt as a claim on future cash flow. That is the difference. The poor man asks, "Can I afford this monthly?" The strategic man asks 5 harder questions. Will this debt control an asset? Will this asset produce income, efficiency, scale, or bargaining power? Is the return higher than the cost of capital? Can I survive if timing turns against me? Does this debt increase my freedom, or does it make me easier to command? If you cannot answer those questions, you are not using financial leverage. You are gambling with borrowed power. Machiavelli warned that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. That is why debt for image is so seductive. People see the car, they see the apartment, they see the clothes, they see the lifestyle. They do not see the payment bleeding quietly behind the image. They do not see the panic when income drops. They do not see the humiliation of staying in a place you hate because your obligations own your next 6 months. This is how men become trapped, not by one giant mistake, but by 1,000 small purchases made to protect an identity they have not earned. If you are the right viewer, stop false progress. You already know the difference between building power and decorating weakness. The real problem is not that you lack ambition, it is that your ambition keeps leaking into image, distraction, and unstructured effort. If you stay there, you will keep mistaking motion for leverage, while time makes your excuses more expensive. On Patreon, I go deeper into the private frameworks behind proof, positioning, discipline, funnels, leverage, and self-command. It is not for men who want motivation, it is for men who want the system underneath the result. The decision is yours. You must stop seeing debt emotionally. Poor men see debt through shame. Impulsive men see debt through desire. Strategic men see debt through control. That is the identity shift. You are not here to become debt-free as a moral performance. You are here to become sovereign, and sovereignty does not mean you never owe money. It means no obligation has the power to make you betray your future. It means your debts, if you have them, are structured around assets, not insecurity. It means you do not borrow to be admired. You borrow only when the obligation buys capacity, control, time, scale, or ownership. The unsupported man must be even colder, because you cannot afford decorative debt. You cannot afford lazy optimism. You cannot afford to borrow against a version of yourself that has not produced evidence yet. Build proof first. Build skill first. Build cash flow first. Build a buffer first. Build the discipline to look ordinary while your foundation becomes dangerous. This is where most men fail. They want the signal before the substance. They want the lifestyle before the machine. They want the appearance of arrival before they have built the engine that makes arrival sustainable. But Machiavelli understood appearances. He understood that the crowd is captured by what it sees. And that is exactly why the strategic man must become more disciplined than the crowd. Let others buy symbols. You build systems. Let others finance applause. You finance assets. Let others ask, "How do I look powerful?" You ask, "What do I control?" That is the question that changes a man. What do I control? Do I control a skill? Do I control cash flow? Do I control distribution? Do I control equity? Do I control an asset? Do I control my spending? Do I control my appetite for validation? Because if you do not control yourself, financial leverage will not make you powerful. It will only give your weakness a larger balance sheet. So now comes the deeper question. How does a man know when he has earned the right to use leverage? Because not every opportunity deserves debt, Not every asset deserves debt. Not every ambitious man is ready for debt. There are 7 powers the wealthy use before they borrow, and if you skip them, debt will not accelerate your rise, it will accelerate your exposure. Power. 1. Rich men. Separate productive debt from consumptive debt. Consumptive debt buys what loses value or creates no income. Productive debt buys or expands what can create cash flow, efficiency, ownership, or strategic advantage. This distinction sounds simple, but most men violate it because their ego speaks louder than their math. A man financing luxury before assets is not ambitious. He is impatient. He is trying to be seen before he has become solid. That is why his debt humiliates him. He tells himself he deserves the car because he works hard. He tells himself he deserves the clothes because he has been through pain. He tells himself he deserves the apartment because he needs to feel like he is progressing. But deserving is not a financial strategy. The market does not care what you have suffered. The lender does not care how long you have waited. The payment does not care whether your family underestimated you. This is where unsupported men are especially vulnerable. When no one believes in you, the temptation is to buy visible proof before you have earned actual proof. You want the world to update its judgment. You want the room to see you differently. You want your family, your friends, your old environment, and your silent doubters to feel that you are becoming someone else. But if the proof is borrowed, it is not proof, it is rented status. And rented status always sends the invoice back to your future. Productive debt is different. A manufacturer borrows to buy a machine that increases output. A business owner borrows to buy inventory already demanded by customers. A real estate operator uses a mortgage to control a property that produces rent. A creator improves production only after the channel has already proven demand. In each case, the debt is not feeding an insecurity. It is multiplying a system. That is the difference. One man borrows because he needs to feel powerful. The other borrows because power has already appeared and debt can help him scale it. Before you take any debt, ask yourself one question. Would I still borrow this money if nobody could see what it bought? If the answer is no, you are not building power. You are buying validation. And validation bought with debt is one of the most humiliating forms of slavery, because you pay interest to impress people who are never going to save you. Power 2. They borrow against systems, not fantasies. Wealthy operators use debt where there is already proof. Customers, contracts, collateral, inventory turning, properties renting, demand showing, revenue repeating. The weak man borrows because he believes. The strategic man borrows because evidence has appeared. Belief is not enough. Belief does not pay interest. Proof does. This is where most ambitious men deceive themselves. They say they need capital to start, but often they need discipline first. They need proof first. They need a sharper offer first. They need one customer first. They need a channel that shows demand first. They need the humility to test the market before they ask money to obey their fantasy. A fantasy becomes dangerous when it is financed, because when a man uses his own time to test an idea, the market can correct him cheaply. He can adjust, he can learn, he can take rejection without owing interest on his delusion. But when he borrows before proof, the fantasy becomes a contract. Now every weak assumption has a due date. Every optimistic projection has a payment attached to it. Every delay becomes more expensive. Every mistake becomes less private. This is why lenders become the real owners of impatient men. Not because they physically own them, but because the borrower has placed his future choices under the pressure of repayment before his system has earned that pressure. A strategic man does not ask debt to create proof. He uses proof to justify debt. That order matters. Asset first, proof second, structure third, leverage fourth. Most weak men reverse it. They want leverage first. They want money before proof. They want scale before skill. They want admiration before substance. And that is why their debt becomes punishment. If you are building from zero, do not borrow to discover whether you are competent. Borrow only when competence has already left evidence. This is not conservative thinking. This is power thinking. Because the man with proof can negotiate. The man with proof can choose better terms. The man with proof can walk away. The man with proof is not begging the lender to believe in his dream. He is showing the lender a machine that already works. And when you have a machine that already works, leverage becomes a tool. Without that machine, leverage becomes a trap. Power. 3. They respect the cost of capital. Leverage works only when the return on the asset is greater than the cost of borrowing. That sentence sounds simple, but most men never live by it. They calculate the dream. They do not calculate the downside. They imagine the revenue. They ignore the interest. They imagine the win. They ignore the timing. They imagine the best case. They ignore the version of reality where customers delay, markets tighten, rates rise, equipment breaks, tenants leave, platforms change, or buyers disappear. Finance is not a motivation video. Finance is a battlefield of numbers. If the asset earns 8% and your money costs 12%, your ego is financing your own defeat. That is not ambition. That is a man paying interest to protect a fantasy. The spread is the battlefield. If the return is higher than the cost, leverage can strengthen you. If the cost is higher than the return, leverage quietly drains you. And if you do not know the difference, you are not a strategist. You are a gambler using business language. This is where men who hate math get destroyed. They love the story. They love the possibility. They love the image of being an operator, investor, founder, owner, builder, or man of vision. But numbers do not care about your identity. Numbers reveal whether your identity has structure. A disciplined man knows the spread. A weak man only sees the dream. And this is why many men stay poor while appearing busy. They chase activity that feels productive but does not produce return. They buy tools before they have customers. They rent space before they have demand. They pay for branding before they have proof. They expand before the system is stable. Then they call the pressure unfair. It is not unfair. It is arithmetic. And arithmetic is one of the few forces in life that does not care how you feel about yourself. Power. 4. They protect against bad timing. This is where the poor man's fantasy dies. He assumes income continues. He assumes interest rates stay friendly. He assumes buyers remain available. He assumes refinancing will be easy. He assumes the market will give him more time. But markets do not give time to men who need mercy. A weak man builds his plan around perfect conditions. A strategic man builds his plan around pressure. That is the difference. Anyone can look intelligent when the market is rising, when income is stable, when credit is available, when clients are paying, when rates are low, when everything moves according to the fantasy in his head. But debt does not test you in perfect conditions. Debt tests you when timing turns against you. Debt tests you when the income you expected arrives late. Debt tests you when the property sits empty. Debt tests you when demand slows. Debt tests you when a supplier fails, a client disappears, a platform changes, or a bank decides that the same deal it loved yesterday is too risky today. That is where real leverage separates itself from borrowed arrogance. Blackstone survived the Hilton deal because the asset had enough strategic depth to endure pressure. Hilton was not a dream with a logo. It was a real hospitality system with brand power, operating history, physical assets, and recoverable value. Pressure came. The financial crisis hit. travel weakened. Credit markets tightened. But the asset did not vanish. That is the point. When timing turns against you, the only thing that protects you is structure, not motivation, not confidence, not your vision board, not your need to prove people wrong. Structure. Cash reserves, fixed rates when possible, longer maturities, margin of safety, multiple income streams, exit options, conservative assumptions, a plan for what happens if the world does not cooperate. Machiavelli warned that the prince who relies entirely on promises and neglects precautions is ruined. The same law applies to debt. Do not rely on promises. Do not rely on optimism. Do not rely on perfect conditions. Build precautions. A man without precautions is not brave. He is exposed. And exposed men do not negotiate from power. They negotiate from fear. This is why debt can turn a confident man into a quiet servant. At first, he feels bold. He tells himself he is taking action. He tells himself no one understands his ambition. He tells himself risk is required. Then timing turns. Now the same man who talked about freedom cannot leave his job. He cannot reject a bad client. He cannot pause to think. He cannot wait for better terms. He cannot recover with dignity because every month arrives like a creditor with a knife. That is not leverage. That is pressure without protection. They use leverage to buy time, scale, and control. The point of leverage is not to feel bigger. It is to become more productive. A manufacturer borrows to buy equipment that increases output. A real estate operator uses a mortgage to control a property that produces rent. A business owner borrows to buy inventory already demanded by customers. An operator uses debt to expand proven demand. A content entrepreneur may borrow carefully to improve production, but only after the channel has already proven demand, retention, and monetization. That is leverage. Using money to multiply a system that already works. But borrowing to feel successful before your system works is not leverage. It is vanity wearing a suit. This is where many men confuse scale with escape. They think more money will save them from the discipline they have refused to build. They think a loan will make them serious. They think a better camera will make them consistent. They think a nicer office will make the business real. They think paid ads will fix a weak offer. They think equipment will replace skill. They think capital will replace character. It will not. Leverage magnifies what is already there. If there is proof, leverage magnifies proof. If there is discipline, leverage magnifies discipline. If there is demand, leverage magnifies demand. But if there is confusion, leverage magnifies confusion. If there is insecurity, leverage magnifies insecurity. If there is weak judgment, leverage magnifies weak judgment. That is why debt is dangerous in the hands of a man who has not mastered himself. It does not merely give him resources. It gives his weaknesses a larger field to operate in. You want leverage to buy capacity, not ego. You want it to buy production, not performance. You want it to buy ownership, not applause. You want it to buy time, not a costume. There is a colder way to ask the question. Will this debt make my machine stronger, or will it make my image louder? If it strengthens the machine, it may be strategic. If it only makes the image louder, it is poison, because image debt has no mercy. It gives you a short burst of status, then quietly takes your options. You get the attention first. Then you get the obligation. You get the admiration first. Then you get the pressure. You get the appearance of power first. Then you discover that the appearance was rented. And rented power always belongs to someone else. If you are the right viewer, stop false progress. You already know when you are building a real machine and when you are just decorating your insecurity. The real problem is not that you need more motivation, it is that you need private systems strong enough to survive without applause. If you stay the same, your ambition will keep producing motion without ownership. On Patreon, I break down the deeper frameworks for proof, positioning, discipline, funnels, leverage, self-command, and the private architecture behind visible power. It is not for men who want to feel inspired, it is for men who want to become difficult to control. The decision is yours. Power 6. They never let debt destroy negotiating power. This may be the most important law. If debt forces you to accept disrespect, it is not leverage. It is a chain. If debt makes you stay in a job that drains you, it is not leverage. If debt makes you tolerate clients who abuse you, it is not leverage. If debt makes you afraid to take the calculated risk your future requires, it is not leverage. It is a prison with a nice dashboard. Strategic debt should create more options, not fewer. This is the test most men avoid because it exposes the truth. They ask whether they can make the payment. But they do not ask what kind of man they will become in order to keep making it. Will this debt make you quieter around people who disrespect you? Will it make you more obedient at work? Will it make you delay the business you claim you want to build? Will it make you afraid to leave a city, a relationship, a job, a client, or a room that is slowly shrinking you? Will it make you easier to command? Because if it does, then the debt is not financial anymore. It has entered your spine. It has changed your posture. It has lowered your voice. It has made you negotiate against your own future. A man with no obligations can wait. He can refuse. He can leave. He can rebuild. He can tolerate temporary discomfort because his life is not chained to unnecessary payments. A man buried under bad debt must smile when he wants to walk away. He must accept terms he hates. He must remain available to people he should have outgrown. He must preserve income. He does not respect because his obligations have become stronger than his pride. That is the humiliation. Not that he owes money, but that the money he owes decides how much disrespect he must swallow. This is why savings matter. This is why buffers matter. This is why low fixed costs matter. This is why proof matters. This is why a man who wants power must build his life so that he can say no without collapsing. The ability to say no is not a personality trait. It is a financial structure. If your life cannot survive refusal, your confidence is decorative. You do not have freedom, you have permission from your next paycheck. Strategic leverage should increase your ability to say no. It should help you own assets, improve production, acquire cash flow, or control something valuable enough to make you less dependent. If debt makes you more dependent, it is moving you in the wrong direction. No matter how impressive it looks, no matter how good it feels, no matter how many people admire what it bought. Power 7. They know the final rule. The lender eats first. This rule must be carved into your mind. The owner may have vision, the founder may have ambition, the investor may have confidence, but the lender has priority. Debt holders stand before equity holders. Interest gets paid before dreams get rewarded. This is why intelligent men remain humble around leverage. They know that debt can make them rich, but they also know that debt can remove them from the throne. The lender eats first, always. That sentence should sober you. It should make you calmer, more precise, less romantic, less eager to call every risk an opportunity. Because debt is not impressed by your story. Debt is a contract. Debt is not impressed by your pain. Debt is a contract. Debt is not impressed by how unsupported you were, how many people doubted you, how many nights you worked, or how badly you want to become undeniable. Debt is a contract. And contracts do not care about the emotional meaning you attach to them. This is why the rich do not merely borrow. They structure. They ask what the debt controls. They ask what cash flow supports it. They ask what happens if timing turns. They ask what protections exist. They ask what the lender can do if the deal goes wrong. They ask who eats first. They ask what remains if the fantasy dies. A weak man signs because he wants the money. A strategic man signs only when he understands the power relationship. That is the hidden mechanism. Debt is not money. Debt is a claim on future cash flow, a claim on assets, a claim on attention, a claim on attention, a claim on time, a claim on choices, a claim on the man you will be forced to become if the structure is wrong. This is why the final formula must be simple. Asset first, proof second, structure third, leverage fourth. That is the order. Do not borrow before asset. Do not borrow before proof. Do not borrow before structure. Do not borrow because your pride is impatient. Do not borrow because you are tired of looking ordinary. Do not borrow because you want your family to finally believe you. Do not borrow because your friends still see the old version of you. Do not borrow because society ignores men without symbols. Build the asset. Create the proof. Design the structure. Then decide whether leverage makes the machine stronger. If you want to use financial leverage like a strategist, follow the leverage ladder. First, build a scarce skill. Then turn that skill into proof. Then turn proof into income. Then protect income with savings. Then use savings and proof to acquire or build an asset. Then, and only then, consider debt to scale what has already shown evidence of working. Do not borrow to discover whether you are competent. Borrow only when competence has already left evidence. That is how you stop fearing debt like a poor man and stop worshipping debt like an idiot. You begin controlling it like a strategist. From this point forward, debt is no longer a moral issue. It is a power issue. You are not asking, is debt bad? You are asking, does this debt make me more sovereign or more controllable? You are not asking, can I afford the payment? You are asking, what asset does this obligation command? You are not asking, will this make people respect me? You are asking, will this make me harder to replace, harder to ignore, and harder to control? That is the mind of the builder. That is the mind of the man who is done begging to be seen. Because the unsupported man has no business borrowing for applause. He must build for ownership. He must convert pain into discipline, discipline into skill, skill into proof, proof into leverage, leverage into assets, assets into freedom, and freedom into a position where his life no longer depends on being chosen by people who doubted him. So, before you take debt, ask yourself the question that strips away every lie. Would I still borrow this money if nobody could see what it bought? If the answer is no, you are not building power, you are buying validation. If the answer is yes, ask the second question. Does this debt control an asset that can survive pressure? If the answer is no, you are not using leverage. You are feeding a fantasy. And if the answer is yes, ask the final question. Can I survive if the timing turns against me? Because that is where real men are separated from loud men. Not in the dream, in the pressure. Machiavelli did not write for men who wanted comfort. He wrote for men who wanted to understand power as it actually behaves. And power does not forgive confusion. Financial leverage can make you stronger, but only if you are already disciplined enough not to use it as a mask. The wealthy do not worship debt, they control it. The poor do not merely fear debt, they misunderstand what debt is for. So stop borrowing for image. Stop financing insecurity. Stop asking whether the payment fits your current weakness. Ask whether the debt builds your future power. Ask whether it buys capacity, control, time, scale, ownership, and negotiating strength. Ask whether it gives you more options or fewer. Ask whether it makes you more sovereign or more obedient. Because the goal is not to look rich. The goal is to become harder to command. The goal is not to impress people who doubted you. The goal is to build assets that no longer require their belief. The goal is not to escape shame with payments. The goal is to replace shame with proof. And proof does not beg. Proof does not explain. Proof does not need applause. Proof stands in the world and changes the cost of ignoring you. That is what controlled leverage can become. Not a shortcut, not a mask, not a costume. A force multiplier for a man who has already built discipline, proof, structure, and self-command. Comment. Assets. If you are done borrowing for image and ready to think in ownership,